Welcome back to the Contacts Coaching Podcast. We are joined today by Roger Jones, head basketball coach at North Monterey County High School. Coach, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, man. This is cool.
Let's dive in then, Coach. Let us know how we got here. Take us through your background. Where did it all begin?
I went to North County, and I knew I wanted to coach high school basketball when I was still in high school. I knew that eventually that's what I wanted to come back and do that for a couple of reasons. My varsity coach, Jesus Galindo, he was such an important figure in my life. And so he was just somebody that I just wanted to emulate. And so when I was coming up as 14, 15, 16 years old, that was the guy that was like, this is somebody I want to model after. So right there, I'm already thinking he's the coach. I want to coach. So for me, that was the first time that I really thought about really wanted to do that. And even like my senior year of high school, when I was on varsity, I would help at the freshman practice. Like I would finish my practice and then jump in with the freshmen and working with them and this and that and the other. And then right after I graduated from high school, Gene Cotter from Basketball Jones, anybody in this area or anywhere, probably across the dang state of California, if you ever picked up a basketball, you probably ran into Gino back in the day. I had a connection with him because his wife worked at North County. She was a counselor there. And so I knew him, and he'd come around to the games and open gyms and whatever. So he brought me in to do Basketball Jones camps when I was like 17. And that was like, wow, this is like so much fun and it's so special. And I started out working with the youngest kids, the little 9-year-old kids. And it was like, it's intoxicating. You know what I mean? When you're just feeling like you're trying to put together this little team, even in a camp where it's 8 hours a day for 5 days a week, and you're running around to do this drill and this drill, and then the games are 15-minute long games, but it didn't matter. I was in love with it at that point when I was, like I said, I think I graduated high school, I was only 17. Went and played junior college basketball for a couple of years, but would come back every summer to do the camps. And then when I finished junior college, I reached out to my freshman coach, Fernando Cruz, another guy who's been around for a million years out here. And he's a legend in his own right. And I told him, I was like, I want to start coaching. I want to come help you as an assistant coach with the freshman kids. And he never really had a full-time assistant ever. He's such an old school guy, and he does his own thing. But I wanted to go and learn from him. So I was his assistant for 3-4 years, whatever it was. Had a lot of learning experiences with that. Like I said, I was still really young. I was only 21, I think, when I jumped on as assistant coach. And then when we got a new varsity coach at North County, he wanted me to jump up and work with him on the varsity staff specifically, just because I'd been with those younger kids for a couple of years, and he thought it would be good to have a connection point from what they had already had with their coaching. So I jumped up to varsity, and I did that for about 3 years there. And then I jumped over to the girls program. I coached girls basketball for 2 years, and that was really great. And I still have really strong connections with so many of those players that I coached. And then when Pat Kilty, who was my high school teammate, took over the boys program after Jared had left, I went back and did the JV boys for a couple of years under him, and I was assistant with him for a couple of years. And once we got through 2020 and 2021 and all that stuff, the opened up again. Pat, he stepped down. He was trying to start his family and all that stuff. So I made a push to get in there, and I was really happy to. So this will be my 4th season coming up here. So I'm really excited.
So much that we're going to talk about now. That's why I always love this part of the show, getting the whole background and where do I want to go? So much. Okay, so let's start with this. As an assistant coach, right? So you, 17-year-old, helping as much as you can. You come back from JC, you're helping. You're in the Basketball Jones community and the culture. You come back and start helping as a freshman assistant, varsity assistant, right? Girls coach. Back to an assistant, now head coach, right? So you've been an assistant in many places.
Yeah.
And you made a comment to me before we got on about trying to find more assistants to help. And what I'm curious about, you're going into year 4. What have you learned about, actually rephrase, how do you deploy your assistants to maximize the value add for the kids based on your own experience as an assistant? And I'm sure there were times when you were standing around and there were times when you were super engaged, right? So I'm curious how that's evolved over the last couple of years when you were the girls coach and now the boys coach, and how you're trying to figure that piece out. Because that's, I think, what I hear from a lot of coaches that they struggle with. Some to the point where I don't even want them because I don't know how to use them.
So that is actually a really good question. And I've struggled with this as an assistant, like you said, where sometimes you're not entirely sure what you should be doing. And sometimes you feel like, okay, I know this is clearly what I'm supposed to do. And that sort of depends on the head coach. Like I said, Coach Cruz never really had an assistant coach. So for me, it was like, I was just like trying to get in where I could fit in. Sometimes I'm just standing next to him for 20 minutes at practice while he's talking about this or that or the other. When I had opportunities, sometimes it would just be, we're running a possession, the play stops, and he goes to talk to a kid. I'm like, all right, here's my chance to go talk to this kid. And I just try to make my way wherever I can. Certainly in games, that's the kind of thing where I thought I had a lot of value because coaches, he's focused on the game, and I can turn and put my focus to one kid on the bench, or in the timeout, I could pull a kid aside and quickly give him a reminder or whatever he needs to do. So as an assistant, trying to find my way originally was pretty tough. When we moved up to varsity, my role was a little bit more clearly defined. And I think, again, because there was a deliberate need from the head coach, Jared, he was like, I want you up here for X, Y, and Z. So again, I had a pre-existing relationship with a lot of those kids because I was an assistant. He had me focusing more on, you're focused on the big guys. You're going to have 30 minutes a day with them working on and he let me have my own curriculum, create my own sort of program. And then I also was big on coaching the defense up. So he was a little bit more focused on the offensive side. And he was like, I want you to focus on the defense at practice. So I'm sometimes not really paying attention to the offense at practice. I'm watching exactly what guys are doing on defense, and I'm yelling, telling guys, hey, here's what we got to be. So that was the first time I felt like I had a more definitive role, working with the defense, working with the big guys. And then also, I have a very loud voice. He did not have as loud of a voice. So sometimes during games, he'd tell me to call a play, and then I'd call the play. Also, so now with me as a head coach and my assistant coaches, my first year as the head coach, I really only had my JV coach as my assistant coach. So it was like we were spread pretty thin. So it was like whatever amount of time he could give was valuable, but it was really hard because sometimes it was just me at practice. And so I'm trying to manage a practice with whatever it is, 13, 14 guys, and make it feel like everybody's getting attention, everybody's getting work. So the value of assistance was clear to me pretty quick. And also when I coached the girls, I was in the same boat. I had an assistant coach for 1 year there, but now the last couple of years, I've really been trying to cultivate that. And I had a couple guys that were former graduates that wanted to come back and coach or wanted to come back and work. Now I'm thinking more, okay, I have these two guys played a lot more guard. I'm not a guard, right? That wasn't my game. So any experience they have and then little bits of wisdom. So I'm thinking, okay, you guys are my guard coaches. Here's what we're going to try to do I'm going to try to get you at least 20 minutes of practice or whatever it is to work with these guys. And there's the things I specifically want to see, but also if you have your own ideas about what's valuable or what you think could help them, right? And then I have a couple guys that are a little bit more on the wing and the kind of shooters and slashers. So I have a nice balance of coaches now that have experience at different positions and different play styles and at different levels. And so the coaching staff is really rounding into shape. And it took me a couple of years to figure out how to make that work, and also just who are the right kind of people, because it's not just about were you a good player. If you're a good player, does not mean you're a good coach. And there's even guys when I tell them when the last couple of years that have graduated, and I'll tell them like, hey man, go to college, do your thing, find what you love to do. But if you ever want to come back, I would love to have you back here, because I know that regardless of what you accomplish as a player, I know that you could be a really valuable coach to some of these kids. So I've started almost like planting seeds earlier now about, hey man, it'd be great to have you back, even if it's just for a couple practices a week or something, maybe.
Yeah, for sure. When I was at El Camino, I had a kid that would come try out for the team every year, and he wasn't any good, and he knew that, and he would just keep coming back, and he ended up just being a manager for me and was sitting on my bench ultimately, and then went back and ended up being a coach at the high school. And I want to say he was like the head freshman coach for a while. He was the varsity assistant, but it was just like he knew that there was a place he could contribute, just not necessarily between the lines. Okay, let me go back to my other traditional question here. So you have an extensive background as an assistant, camp coach, doing a bunch of these things, and then you get the tap. All right, it's your turn. Head varsity girls coach. And I actually want you to do two things here. I want you to also talk about your transition being the head boys coach. And with all that wisdom, you still learn that you don't know anything. So what did you realize right away you needed to figure out, both on the girls' side and when you became the boys' coach? And how are those different? How are they similar? But what were the eye-opening moments that you were like, oh, I thought I had this figured out as the armchair quarterback?
Yeah. So when I first got, and I think probably every coach, first-time head coach, and certainly young coach is guilty of. So when I first got the head coaching job for the girls, I was still 25. I was super young, probably too young. And it's like, I'm in my head, I'm like, oh yeah, I got this awesome play. We're going to run this play and we're going to score every time and it's going to be fantastic. It's that kind of thing. It's not how it works. And everything looks brilliant on paper in your head or whatever. So
Especially on the girls' side when
yeah,
everybody comes out and zones you. But anyway, we'll leave that alone.
yes. Oh my goodness. Yeah. So that was probably the first thing that was like a little bit of a humble pie of, okay, so just because you have ideas or thoughts or things you've been thinking about for years, always being able to execute them isn't always that easy. And specifically, player to player, year to year, what does that need to look like and how do you need to tweak things? For me with the girls, I actually was really lucky when I took over the girls program. I had that first group, I had 4 seniors on the team, and they had played for the same coach basically since they were in like 6th grade through travel ball and through high school. Zach Cook, he's coaching over at Watsonville High now. He's had great teams all throughout the years and stuff. But they embraced me. They weren't like, oh, we miss our old coach. So I'm still really close with those girls, and it's super. So I was lucky in that regard that they put their trust in me. But it was definitely a learning curve as far as just understanding, okay, the X's and O's of this is not all it takes. You came up with a perfect play or whatever. That was the first one that was like, it's definitely an ego killer when you think about stuff like how you think you understand the game in a certain way. And then outside of that too, like I said, I didn't have an assistant coach that year. It was just myself and then the JV coach. And the JV coach was a rookie too. She'd never been a head coach either. So we were both fresh. And so that was the biggest time as far as just like managing a program was just so hard, man. And you got all these different kids and we're trying to get in charge of scheduling all this stuff and parents and just like the administrative stuff, which is a weak point for me in general. So that was like those are probably the toughest learning curves, is recognizing that and how to think about the game a little bit differently, and then just all the other stuff that comes along with the stuff that I don't love to do. We love the game. All the other stuff you got to do, I think, is like you got to work to get the fun part, to get the game day. You got to do all the other stuff, and that was a tough one. I was like, this is not fun. I want to just play.
Which then leads you back to being an assistant. If you think about Kilty now, who's now in the AD role, is in my role, and you've shifted seats, and it's a similar deal for him now, right? And what I've joked all over the years on this thing is when you're the head coach, you get to do basketball about 15% of the time. The other 85% of the time, you're not even a basketball coach. You're doing all the other stuff. So talk a little bit about that. What have you figured out how to hack, so to speak, right? The things that got you the first time, that scheduling, managing the program, logistics, the stuff that you don't love, that you don't feel you're very good at. How have you grown in those areas since taking over the boys for your second run as a head coach?
Yeah, I'm the type of person generally where if I'm experiencing something new, I'm usually going to struggle with it at first. I'm just not like a quick learner. But I also am very good at figuring out how to make things easy for me. And so I came up with, okay, I'm going to carve out this amount of time and I'm going to do all the transportation forms today. Like and then I could just get it out of my brain and I don't have to worry about it. And so I learned to chop things up into smaller bites and focus on figuring out what to prioritize, right? What's the most important things to get done first and things like that. And then obviously I had Pat as somebody I could talk to. I had Jared was still around. I still talk to him, and guys who had been around and been head coaches, I could still get their input or they could explain things to me or whatever. Even just the athletic secretary at the high school, Susie, come here. I'm going to show you how to do it all.
She's done it for a long time.
Yeah. And so I learned to lean on the right people. And one of those things I say to some of my kids sometimes, it's like one of my little funny quotes is sometimes to get through life, you have to be smart enough to know how dumb you are. And so I know where the pitfalls are and the things that I'm not gonna do well at. So I got to know, okay, I got to be on my stuff so I don't fall into these pitfalls that are just weak points of mine.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's great wisdom, and it's one of the things that probably as a 25-year-old you didn't know, right? And now as a little bit,
I'm in my in my 30s now, in the mid 30s here, so
a little more experienced coach, regardless of age. It's funny how much we are more willing to acknowledge, I don't know, like I'll go figure it out, but I don't have the answer for that. And when we were younger, it's like, oh yeah, this is what it is. And it's no, you don't have a clue. Okay. So on that note, you spend a ton of time over the last 20 years working with Basketball Jones, right? And Gino before, and now Ace. And the piece of that for people that aren't familiar is they do a really good job at the camps, I would say, generating energy and enthusiasm and those types, right, where the kids leave at a bare minimum, they had a good time, right? So let me rephrase this. What would you say is the best thing that you do in your program that has the largest ripple effect on your culture. Meaning you have all this background and experience being around an organization that I think does culture pretty well, but it's not plug and play, right? Doing camps and running a program are completely different beasts. But are there things you've stolen or that you've generated yourself that you can offer someone else that it's like, hey, we lean on this really hard and it's really what creates that transformational experience in our program?
This is the sort of two facets to this, or two results of this. We preach the real strong unity of our community, right? Like we talked about it before we jumped on, about we're a pretty small community. It's Prunedale, Cashville, basically. There's a couple elementary schools. They feed into one middle school. They feed into one high school. And so there's a level of togetherness that we really lean on. As it's not a lot of times where we have a kid like in other school districts where we don't know what kid, he might go to that high school to team up with that kid, or he was over here and now he's going to train. That's not really a problem for us, outside of a couple kids that go to some of the other private schools in the area. And that's always been a thing. But there's a level of bond that we have as a community, and that extends out to like the parents. So it's not really like a basketball thing, but it's a culture thing. And it's not an X's and O's thing, but it's a culture thing, I think. And our best teams that we have is when that is at its strongest. That is when when you look at the North County teams like that have hit that kind of apex, won a league title or made a deep playoff run, that was always the common thread. It was never just talent. It was never just overwhelming talent or size, because we never have that. You know what I mean? We sometimes, back when I was playing, we had bigger guys. Nowadays, we're always trying to figure out how we're going to manage ourselves around the basket or whatever. And then that sort of ties into what I talked about with the assistant coaches. When it's like, I went to school there, Pat went to school there, my assistant coaches, Austin and Cyrus and Jeremy and all these other coaches that have come through, Eli, they all played there. They were all part of that culture. And so now they want to feed back into that culture and perpetuate it. So I think that is what, when we're doing our best, that is actually the thing that I think that we can really hang our hat on.
Yeah, and that's super important, especially as what I would call a neighborhood public school, even though your neighborhoods are very different than like being in Salinas or somewhere else. But if you can have long-term consistency, and so you're probably coach number 4 in 30 years, if I was running the math.
Yeah, about, I think so. Head coach, head varsity coach, I think I'm the 6th since 2000.
Okay.
But
So
not that many.
it's not like a turnover deal, so that you have some consistency, and not just 6, but Patrick to you, right, to Jared before, there's been like,
and there's absolutely like a lineage, so to
yeah.
speak. And then the other part of that too is a guy like Coach Cruz, who wasn't originally from our area, but he's actually been there longer than any of us. He's been there since 2000. This is his 25th season at North County. So there's a real connective tissue there too.
So how do you hold on to that, especially if it's a positive culture, right? So that's great that you figured out a way to tap into that. And you mentioned you were inviting guys to come back and figuring out who they are, and that's awesome. I'm curious, and I mentioned this earlier, you probably have elite patience, but I've also seen you coach and seen you get hot. But what have, and for those that don't know, and you can give your exact setup, but Coach Jones works at an elementary school and he coaches high school basketball, and you can give a little bit more color to that. But I, for the last 7 or 8 years, have coached the middle school girls team while I coach the high school boys team, purposefully to give me some grounding and what I've learned dealing with more novice athletes that I've been able to then utilize with my more experienced athletes. Talk a little bit about how your work with the younger group, especially what you do, informs your approach to teaching basketball.
I've been working mostly at elementary schools for the last, I don't know, 10 to 12 years, whatever it is. And the one thing I didn't really understand until I got into the educational space is just like the different ways that people learn, man, and what works for some kid is not going to work for another kid. And so I try to be cognizant of that. I try to think about different ways to present things to people. Sometimes there's a little bit of that sports, like we got to get it done and bust our butts and make it happen. But there's also some things where I know not even just necessarily like how I talk to a kid as far as like attitude wise, but even like how I present it. Am I going to draw it on a whiteboard? Am I going to record a video of it and show them, here's a video of it? Some kids can't get it if you're talking verbally, you know what I mean? So trying to think about that and different ways to explain things or teach things is definitely something I picked up from working in elementary schools. Like I started in special ed. I don't do that anymore, but that's where I started. So that's where you learn all about different ways that people learn and how to be aware of that and sensitive to that. And then I try to keep that working with younger kids is goofy and fun. And I try to occasionally we lean into that on the high school side. I'm a little bit more serious. Obviously, you see me out there, but I do try to find time to have at least a little bit of fun. And certainly like when there's an element of a team, either sometimes I got a player who's just like the goofy guy. And so it's okay, I'm going to feed into that a little bit. And so that he can keep guys loose or whatever. And that kind of thing, I think is great just for the team culture. So it's just trying to keep things light where we can, and then trying to be cognizant of not everybody learns the same way. And I'm still working on getting better at that in a basketball context, right? Like I'm used to doing that in an academic context, but in basketball, sometimes that's tricky because of just the arena that you're in. But I'm still trying to think about that stuff all the time.
I think that is something that has become more front of mind for me as I've figured out my own learning style. And by that meaning, I don't do great with verbal like cues and verbal processing. So like you be trying to explain something to me and I'm like, you can just stop because I need to see it. But until I was probably 35, I never thought of it that way. And then if you remember Coach Aruda, who was here forever, like he would talk through things more for himself, but trying to explain it to me. And it's, dude, I'm going to let you talk because I know this is for you, but I don't understand anything you're telling me. And I need to see a picture. And so I think knowing that as a coach and figuring that out later for anybody that's earlier in the game, not all of us learn the same way. So if that's the case, your kids are in the same boat. So I'm curious, Raj, what have you been able, just in the 3 years you've been now the head coach on the boys team, figuring out like this kid needs to see pictures, right? Or this kid needs to see a video of where do you have an anecdote of this actually landed for me and I've been using this ever since?
Perfect example of this. Like I said, I work with the low post guys a lot and we're working on pivots and footwork and things like that. And a kid is traveling on this move and he doesn't understand that he's traveling. But one of the nice things about today's day and age, I got a nice camera right here. So I'm like, let's do the move exactly like you just did. And I can just record it. And then I can show it to him and I can slow down the video and say, okay, but when you shuffled your foot from here to here, that's a travel. And he goes, oh, I see it. And then the next time he's got it. And it's just one of those kind of simple things where it's just you need to be able to see it sometimes to understand it. Because if I'm telling it to you, or if I'm even trying to slow it down in real time or like in actual life, it doesn't work out. But the first time I thought of like, why don't I just record it and show it to him? It was like a light bulb. This is perfect. And then I use that a lot now, especially with guys like they're shooting form. I'll record them shooting from a couple of different angles and say, okay, what do you look at your guide hand, whatever. So that's a good example of that as far as like when I figured out some of the visual piece. Another thing I really like to do is a lot of times at practice, if we're working on some sort of action or some sort of play, I'll bring in a group of guys. I got everybody, the black team right now, come on. I'll say, we're going to run this play and I'll hand the clipboard to a kid and say, I draw that play for everybody. And so now that kid he's sitting in my seat and he's okay, this kid. And so now that he's physically drawing it on the whiteboard, it's going to help it sink in for him what he needs to do on the court. You know what I mean? So it's like putting him in a different position to look at it helps a lot sometimes because he can do it, but he just doesn't know necessarily that he does know how to do it until he actually can show it to somebody else, until you can teach it to somebody else.
For sure. What's funny about that is the presumption as coaches that we think the kids know what the symbols on the whiteboard actually mean. And going back to the very beginning of instruction in beginner's mind, it's, hey, how many coaches listening to this have sat down and taken time out of the day to go straight line, right?
That's so funny.
Dotted line versus squiggly line.
I started doing that now at the beginning of every season. I'm like, okay, guys, if it's a circle, that's us on offense. If it's an X, that's them. Straight line is a cut. A dotted line is a pass. A squiggly line is a dribble. The little bar is a screen, whatever. I have to make sure just because even coming from a different coach, like Coach Cruz busts out the old chalk and he'll scribble something on the hardwood and the kids are like, I don't know what that was. You know what I'm saying? So I'm like, all right, now this is my language. We're still playing the same sport, but there's a little bit different verbal language. This is a side note. I don't know if did you ever watch any of the stuff with JJ and LeBron, JJ Redick and LeBron and the mind the game stuff?
JJ had the X's on offense.
It's driving me crazy. Like JJ.
And he's the head NBA coach now.
And he's using like a legal pad. And I'm like, you're a millionaire. Just send somebody to Dick's Sporting sporting goods and get a whiteboard, man. I don't know.
I was laughing at the same thing. I'm like, dude, you're about to be an NBA head coach and you have the X's on offense. But whatever, as long as your team understands,
Yeah,
like you're
that's true.
good. You're
Yeah.
good. Okay, so that's awesome. I love that. The other thing I wanted to follow up on in regards to that is I'm pretty sure you guys have a camera in the gym. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Like a huddle camera? No.
The NFHS.
No, we don't.
Okay.
We haven't gotten that one yet. We have. It's funny because every year we talk about that, but we always have parents that are always like wanting to volunteer and film for us. And it's just, man, like I'm cool with just keeping the parents involved. You know what I mean? And if the year comes where no parent wants to do it or whatever, which might be next year because the woman who films for us the last couple of years, her last kid's graduating, so maybe she'll be like, okay, I'm out. But again, it comes back to that community thing where I played with a guy named Eddie Stefani. His mom filmed the football games, the basketball games, the baseball games for years. Eddie was a senior when I was a sophomore, and that was her last son. He graduated, and she still filmed all the way through another 8 years after he graduated, even though she had no kids that went to school there. You know what I mean? That's just the stuff that kind of works out sometimes. So it's, yeah, man, we're just going to keep rolling with Kathy.
I'm pretty sure Kathy would be cool with it because I've met her and she's about that film. That's great.
I bet you probably ran into Kathy. That's true.
The reason I was asking is a lot of the schools have them now. You can turn them on and have them film practice. And then what we did a few years ago is it was like Black Friday somewhere at one point, and I got like this TV for $200, like giant 50-inch. I mounted it in the gym. If you remember, it's over there. And we would stop practice and I would have the computer set up and we would go over there and take 5 minutes, show them, and then get right back in the deal. So with your phone, even the same deal, and you can AirPlay now, right? You can do a similar deal. Just be careful because with these new screens, you got kids in the gym who will break it and you don't even know until you try to turn it on and it doesn't work and you have no idea. So that TV doesn't work anymore, but it was great for 2 years for anybody that's trying to get creative. Anyhow, let's moving on. What would you say if I asked you how your approach to coaching has changed over the years? Right? If we go all the way back to the beginning as a 17-year-old, we don't need to necessarily spend a ton of time there because you're still trying to figure out who you are. But even like just year 1 to going into year 4, how has your approach changed?
Okay, so the biggest thing I think that I've tried to do over the last 2 seasons, so last season and coming into this season, is trying to emphasize the player ownership aspect of the team. And I'm the head coach and I got my own ego about stuff and I want the team to be this way and blah, 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 blah. And trying to understand better, okay, but this is your guys' team. You guys got a handful of years here to play, and trying to emphasize that they take ownership of things. So for like our practices, a lot of times I won't really do much as far as actively like leading things for the first 15, 20 minutes of practice because my guys know the warm-ups. They know what they're supposed to do. And not only do they not know the warm-ups, like we do a drill where they have to do like a passing weave drill and they have to do it perfectly. And they got to do it X amount of times perfectly in a row. And then we can move on. And they know now, oh, that wasn't a good enough rep. We're back to 0. I don't have to say we're back to 0. They know that pass wasn't crisp or didn't get caught cleanly or that he missed that jump stop or whatever. So it's more like trying to set the table for what the expectations are and then trying to let the leaders on the team take ownership of it and say, okay, this is our practice. This is our team. And not just being the dictator, so to speak. It's more like, and really the reason why I started doing that is just because I don't know how long I'm going to coach. Could be decades, whatever. But for these guys, and as a player, you got 4 years at the most. So it's you guys should be the ones excited to try to make the most of this while you have the opportunity. High school, and then obviously a couple guys get a chance to play in college. But even when you go to college, it's not the same as high school. That I think is the biggest change, is me trying to pull back on the reins a little, or let go of the reins, I should say, and put guys in positions where they can really just take the lead and run with it. Even like timeouts during games, I'll let my point guards run. If he's seeing something that the other guy's not understanding or whatever, like I said, just like earlier, I'll give him the clipboard and the marker. Hey, man, talk about what we need to talk about.
No, I love that. And I think the question I would ask anybody is, what is the objective of sport, of athletics? And we're trying to win games for sure. But what I try to instill over here, at least from the athletics perspective, is sports are about teaching leadership, followership, and how to be part of something bigger than yourself. doing what you do is now growing those people as human beings, right? And I think that's a great way to do it. I'll give you two things based on what you just said. The timeout piece. Part of it is just being like a get off my lawn guy at this point for me. But it's if I don't call it a timeout, I don't even go in there. Hey, you guys, you're fine. You're by yourself. I didn't call a timeout.
Yeah,
Like
yeah, okay.
they need to talk. We're good. It's another play on kind of what you just talked about by giving the kids that ownership. So figuring out different ways to build that in. And I love that for people that are listening. The other thing that I'm curious about, and please receive this in the spirit that it is intended as far as growth mindset and challenging our current belief system. What you described is that first 20, 30-minute segment, right? And I call that over here, that's our vitamins. There's a set of drills that they're going to do.
Right.
Ours are generally predicated on skill development and shooting. It's something that I started when my daughters were young. And every Sunday we do a 2-hour all comers, kindergarten to college kids, just skill and drill. And over the course of a couple of years, you see the compounding interest, right? Of, oh, wow, okay, they're getting better. So I came back from my year of hiatus and I was like, what would it look like in practice if we just dedicated time to do this particular deal over the course of 60 practices, right? What percentage are you going to get better, right? So the idea of vitamins, and you have yours, I have mine, Coach Brown has his, right? And here's my question. And this comes from the place of time is our only non-renewable resource that we can't get back, right? So how are we maximizing our time? And you described what I would equate to 20 years ago when I was doing 4-man weave to start practice and you had to get 16 or you're stuck on it forever, right? TB has something, it's called Rabbit that they do over here now with the boys. I don't do that. It's an intentional decision. I don't see the transfer from that particular type of activity to gameplay. And so my question for you is, how many times have you adjusted your vitamin work? How are you exploring and analyzing your vitamin work to game transfer? And what other things have you played with in regards to that whole concept?
So I get what you're saying, and you're right. If they're supposed to do this thing in perfectly or whatever, and they keep screwing up. Generally speaking, at the start of the season, I'll start the expectations at a certain place and we'll work till we can get that, right? Especially because sometimes there's new guys, they don't know how the drill works. Maybe there's a little bit of skill deficiency that still needs to build up, whatever it is. But it's one of those things where I will start in a place where I know that we can get that within a reasonable amount of time because like you said, it's a time is non-renewable or whatever. So yeah, I don't want to spend all practice doing this weave drill or whatever. And it doesn't take 15 minutes. I should say that's stretching and warm-ups and all that stuff that we do is all in that. But you're right. There have been times where I'm like, we got to go. We got to get moving. And when that situation comes, yeah, I've absolutely lowered the standard, which is like annoying to do. But you're right. We got to get moving. And it's a tough road to dance or a tough song to dance to a little bit. That's where I think about, okay, how can we shift this to make it less dependent on that? But the thing that I just really like about those kinds of drills is sometimes it's like a mental discipline aspect of it, where it's just, even if, especially if we almost got it and we're at 10 in a row perfect or 9 in a row perfect, we got to get to 10 and somebody botches the 10th layup, right? And it's everybody can drop their shoulders inside their heads and this bleeping guy and blah, 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 blah. But I want to see that sometimes because I want to see how we respond. And so it is a little bit of a double-edged sword, though. You're not wrong to throw that out there as an idea or as a point.
I have zero stake in what any of us do, right? I am just constantly, I look outside at the pool every day and I watch water polo practice, right? And I try to figure out where can we move the needle on the margins because we practice for 90 minutes. That's it. We don't do more. Boom, hard stop. We're out of there, right? So it's, can I afford 10 to 15 minutes of 3-man weave? And I don't know if you ever listen to the basketball podcast with Chris Oliver, but he actually sells shirts that say 3-man weave circle with an X out of it because he just doesn't think there's any transfer. And so again, please receive it as, I'm not being critical. I'm just curious. I'd ask you the same question. Like, when's the last time you started practice playing 5-on-5? Because you mentioned warm-ups and I don't do warm-ups. We roll in, these kids are 15 years old. They don't need warm-up. Let's play.
We do that, I would say. So because of the way we're set up with our gym, we only got the one gym. And So it's more about what is the time we have to work with that day and what is the space. So the days where we jump right into practice and we start fives are usually the days where the girls have a home game and we got to get in and get out. So I'm telling them like, hey, when the bell rings, like you better do high knees to the locker room to get your practice jersey on and stuff. And we got to get something done because we got to work on whatever we need to, whatever's on the horizon, our next opponent, whatever it is. So there are days where, yeah, we jump right in and we try to get fives going or we try to get going. And there are certainly other days where we'll take our time a little bit more. For us, like when we can practice on Saturdays, that's like the most important day for us because we have 2 hours to the gym, no freshmen. Like that's the other thing is those girls' home games. We have varsity, freshman, JV, all sharing in the gym at the same time. It's chaos, and we're just trying to get whatever we can done in an hour, 50 minutes maybe most. But those like Saturdays, those are like the days where okay, now we have all 6 baskets. It's just the varsity guys in here. So it depends on what we have to work with that day. It changes my practice schedule. I don't necessarily do that 3-man weave all the time. I'd say it's probably, I don't know, two to 3 out of 5 practices. That's how it starts. But there's a lot of days where we won't do that because again, it's trying to do something different. But even on the days where we don't have the 3-man weave, there's always something else that the guys are expecting or can be prepared for. So it's again, I still try to lean into you guys getting practice started and the expectations of what does it need to look like at the start of practice. So if we're doing some kind of partner shooting thing right off the bat and we're just trying to get shots, or if we're doing some ball handling stuff, or we're going to go to stations with the different coaches and we're going to rotate a little bit, guys know where they're supposed to be, who they're partnered up with, what coach they're going to first, that kind of thing. I try to keep that element. I try to keep it as consistent as the players can understand what we're trying to achieve or what we're trying to go to next, even if what we're doing might change from practice to practice.
Yeah. And that's where.
Sorry, let me answer your other question real quick because I didn't think about it. The transfer of something like a 3-man weave. I understand that too as a debatable thing. For me, and I think we do. I think I see a lot of value in that, especially because at North County, for whatever reason, we can't always get guys in there when they're freshmen. They went and played football and they didn't want to play basketball, whatever. So we end up with guys sometimes that don't come out to their sophomore, junior year. And so there is a little bit of a skill deficiency or something that's like a fundamental. And so I think it's important to keep that piece in, even if it's not necessarily every other guy on the team needs that, but it might be a couple guys on the team need a little bit of that to get even just to adjust to the speed and the how hard you got to throw a pass on varsity to get it to where it needs to get to. That kind of stuff I think still has value.
Look, man, and this is for everybody listening. What I am working with our coaches all the time on is you have to decide what you believe in and what's authentic to you. And then you got to double down on it. You can't go, oh, I like this idea. I like this idea. I saw this at a clinic. It might not fit what you do. And you got to just figure out what it is. And then if you believe, the kids are going to believe, right? And I'm just always trying to figure out what it is I believe in at age 49. Because it ain't what I believed in at age 24 when I started this journey 25 years ago, right? And so it's like, how are we constantly evaluating our belief system? Which leads me to my next question, which is, what have you most recently changed your mind on? Meaning, I used to be dug in over here, and actually now I'm over here, and here's why, right? And not to get political, but we're in a space as humanity where everything is deeply polarized, and so there's not a lot of open-mindedness to like actually think through how to challenge our belief system. And so one of the things that I always ask on this is, what's something that you've changed your mind on? It doesn't have to be basketball related, coach. It could be about teaching kindergartners. It could be about how you drive your car. But it's like, hey, I used to be so dug in on this, and now I'm over here that it's actually funny.
I would say I mentioned about before, letting go of the reins, so to speak. I think that's probably the biggest thing that I've changed over the last couple of years on, because I really did think when I first was coming over as a head coach, like I have to be in charge of everything all the time and managing everything all the time, because that's just how I saw my coaches coming up. And so I've definitely have changed my mind on that a lot about that kind of thing. Another thing is just some of the ways that I try to coach guys in the moment. I'm trying to be better about the specific words that I use, not like curse words or whatever. Like sometimes those are still going to fly, but more specifically, something like I had coaches when I'm a big man or whatever, I'm playing around the basket and I go up and make a move and I miss. And I got my coach yelling at me, hey, we got to finish inside. And then I'm like, so I'm start coaching, and my big guy, hey man, we got to finish inside. And I'm like, that's a dumb thing to say. Like, I realized at some point, what is stupid? Of course, he knows he's supposed to make the basket. I knew I was supposed to make the basket when I was 19. I just didn't make the damn basket. I know I got to finish the shot. So it's more about, okay, what do I need to say to him to get him to finish other than, hey, bro, we got to finish? Is it because you didn't plant your feet? Is it because you didn't rotate your shoulders? Is it because you didn't finish with a flick on the wrist? Is it because you didn't try? So it's like trying to be a little bit more analytical with my in the moment coaching and in game coaching. Like, I mean, I think about it now, like I was never a point guard, but if my point guard turned the ball over, there's undoubtedly some coach saying, got to take care of the ball, bro. No duh. No duh. We got to take care of the ball. It's one of those things where you're just so used to it when you're a kid. And then now I'm sitting there as an adult and I'm like, that's useless, man. That's not actually helpful. What does that mean, take care of the ball? How do you go about that as opposed to just restating the obvious? So that is definitely something that I'm really key to. And I think about, and I try to think about things I say sometimes. And I'm like, okay, is that in the same category as we got to finish or take care of the ball? Like I'm trying to think about that kind of stuff a lot.
No doubt. And I think that's where I find joy in like the middle school piece of it. And I don't know how or if you get the same transfer from your summer camp Coach Jones mode, right? Where, and you've seen me, I'm pretty mellow when it comes to refs and other stuff. And I'm intense, but I'm laughing at our guys when they throw the ball in the bleacher. What are you doing? It's like when I was younger, that wasn't the case, but I had this moment of realization where it's my middle school girls team throws the ball away 7 out of 10 possessions. And I don't say boo. I don't holler. I don't scream. I don't get upset. It's age appropriate. So why, when like my older guys do it, does my head implode? And it's just, I'm going to try to have this mindset here. And it was, I think for me, created a much more forgiving environment for the team that allowed them to flourish.
Yeah. And like you said, I work with these little kids and in the summertime, and I'm coaching for a long time with Basketball Jones. We have different age groups. And so for the longest time, I was in charge of that 9-year-old age group, a couple 8-year-olds, a couple 10-year-olds, whatever. And you feel like there's such a blank canvas on these kids. So you're always teaching. And then at some point, I'm making the mistake of thinking they're 17 now. So now they should be ready to go. But it's no, they're 17. And so I trying to take that mindset of what can we teach them right now? And that is something that I'm still trying to do better at, because you see me, man, I'm emotional in the moment. You know what I mean? So sometimes I'm just like, and I'm trying to be better at that. And that's definitely a thing that I'm still improving at. And I talk to some of the other coaches that I know and stuff, and they explain things to me a little bit and help me get to a better place with that, where I can try to be the teacher more than just the yeller, so to speak. Right. So trying to be better at that is a big thing that has shifted my mind the last couple of years.
Awesome. Love that. We're always working on that, me especially. Let me ask a combo platter to end this thing. And we had talked about small school environments need our kids to play multiple sports, both for the school's sake, and then how do we adjust as coaches when they get to us? So the question about vitamins, the part of the reason that I lean real heavy into skill acquisition during that time is because we're a boarding school. I don't have kids here in the summer. We're not. What I get during the season is the skill development we're going to do. So I got to actively build that in. And from your standpoint, you made the comment like me, like all our dudes are out there playing football. What I'm curious about, and I'm going to get on my soapbox. I think the youth sports industrial complex is destroying the youth experience and the opportunity for kids to grow based on the pressure people feel to specialize early, right? And thankfully, you're at a similar place to me where they actually do more than one thing. So what I'm curious about is, one, what have you learned watching other coaches that aren't basketball coaches on your campus or elsewhere? And what have you learned about your athletes because they're playing other sports that you've been able to lean into and use in an era where that's not the norm, right? We're playing against other schools that are playing 10 months of basketball, right? But I still would rather have the multi-sport athlete than the year-round kid. I just do. And I think I'm curious what your take is on that and how you value proposition that in your own mind.
But yeah, with the multi-sport stuff, I definitely try to talk to the football coaches and pick their brains, not necessarily, certainly for the way they approach things and things like that, but also just seeing how the kids are doing when they're out there and when you talk to this, when you talk, I take my cues from them as far as how to engage with my players. What do you see in that he's responding to? Right. That's versus. So when he gets to basketball, okay, I know that this might help him as a better way to engage with him. So certainly the football coaches like that. I don't, the other part, just as an aside, this is a funny thing with you talking about with the youth industrial sports complex. Like I'm guilty of that, right? Like I coach travel ball. We do a lot of stuff in the spring and stuff like that too. So it's, but at the same time, I also see where you're playing. I understand your point. It's a weird thing where it's like you're, you have, so you feel like you have to do it in order to stay competitive, to keep playing all year round, even though in the back of my mind, I played soccer when I was a kid. You know what I'm saying? That definitely helped me in basketball, ironically, right? Like playing soccer made me a better basketball player. You know what I mean? Which is, it seems counterintuitive, but it's true. And then I played baseball for a little bit, but baseball was kind of boring. I didn't stick with baseball.
I don't, coach, I just want to be clear. I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with out of season stuff, right? You have a travel team. Your guys are doing stuff in the summer. We do it to the extent that we can. Where I struggle is where we run into students here and worse in other places, right? You can't go to, let's randomly pick San Ramon Valley High School up in Danville and be a multi-sport athlete anymore, unless you're an alien, because you have to be playing year round to be competitive, right? That's taking the joy away from growing up as a kid, right? And finding space for this. My thing is when I have kids that are coming to me and they're like, I don't want to play football anymore because I want to play travel soccer because I'm going to go be a college athlete. And it's no, you're not. Number one, 3% of high school athletes play collegiately. And in the era of the transfer portal, like if you want to go play travel soccer, fantastic. But let's get the message right. And let's not sell this snake oil to kids when at the end of the day, you have club directors making six figures and it's a giant money grab, right? And so it's not, I don't want to demonize the out of season sport on its own. I have an issue when a kid who is a current fall season athlete at my school who is complaining every Monday morning when we work out because they had to go on Sunday to play their spring sport travel team when they're actually going to be a college athlete and their college coach has told them, you don't have to do that, yet they feel obligated to the club and the team to do that, and they're miserable. That's my beef.
Yeah. And I've seen that before with, I don't want to, I guess I'll try to keep it vague here, but specifically, I've seen certain athletes, man, and they have this sort of kids by the time they get to 17 or 18. I've encountered kids where they're approaching sports like it's a job, like it's an obligation they got to go to, like they're working at some factory or something. And I'm like, that makes me sad when I say, I'm like, dude, you should not be feeling this way about going and playing a sport with your friends. And that's what what you're talking about is what that leads to. You know what I mean? But yeah, I find that really depressing, frankly, right? Like you're 17 and you're jaded by this thing that should be super special and super fun. So I understand what you're saying with that for sure.
I don't want to dwell on that. And I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to jump on the pod, Coach. Thank you for being here. Fun to talk about it. Looking forward to seeing you this season, hopefully before that. But again, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, man. Thank you.